Okay, good evening, everyone. Gordon Causey, sometimes known as Gordy Cano on Twitter, Grow a Set on Reddit, Gordon Causey on Facebook. You're welcome to follow me on any platform you like. If you like the videos I'm doing, appreciate the thumbs up. If you want to share, by all means. I don't think I have anyone watching right now, but if you do come on, and you want to catch up, and if you want to put up a comment, I appreciate the engagement. I like the back and forth. I'm breaking from my normal routine of doing these. Normally, I speak simply off the top of my head, and I know that I can ramble on and that I go down, I meander all over the place. So tonight I've done something I normally don't do. I've written down, you can't really see them, but I've written down a bunch of bullet points, and I want to deconstruct all the lies, the misinformation, the disinformation, the propaganda that we've been living with for these past nearly 3 years. December of 2019, so just a month or so from now, that was when the first case of an individual infected with SARS-CoV-2 was reported in China. And at that point, the SARS-CoV-2 virus was dubbed by our media. They called it the novel coronavirus, the novel coronavirus. And it stayed that way for December, January, February. It was simply the novel coronavirus, a fitting description for a virus which was created in a lab. However, the lie, the first lie, first one of the first anyway, that came out was that the virus jumped from a bat to a human in a wet market in Wuhan, China. Anyone suggesting that, well, wait a minute, isn't there a coronavirus lab right next door to that wet market in Wuhan, China? And this is a coronavirus, and there's a coronavirus lab where they work on coronaviruses? Could it have come from there? That we were told was wrong, false, a lie. It was misinformation. And then as time went on, we found out it's in all likelihood true. I believe it's true. CDC Director Redfield believes that's where it came from. U.S. intelligence services have admitted that that's where they think it comes from. But for months, maybe a year or so, you weren't allowed to even suggest that it came from that lab. So the first lie was this novel coronavirus jumped from a bat to a human. And then as time progressed, it went from being the novel coronavirus, and we were told that, well, the chance of human to human transmission is incredibly low. In Canada, our own Dr. Theresa Tam, Chief Medical Health Officer for Canada, the equivalent of she is our Dr. Fauci. She said that having travelers who were returning to Canada from Wuhan, China, that there was no need to have people isolate or quarantine because the chances of human to human transmission were so incredibly low. Australia, New Zealand, and the United States in February of 2020 brought in travel restrictions for people coming from hotspots like Wuhan, China. And famously, Donald Trump was accused of overreacting. You're overreacting. This isn't that big a deal, was the mantra. This is not, don't be overly concerned. You can look that up. Theresa Tam in February, late January, early February of 2020 said Canadians had no need to be overly concerned about this novel coronavirus. But that quickly changed. In March, it went from being the novel coronavirus to the novel and deadly coronavirus. And it wasn't long before the word novel was dropped and deadly became the primary adjective used to describe COVID. It's the first virus in our lifetimes that ever had a branding statement. the deadly coronavirus. And early on, when blew up, there was a report done by Bloomberg, and it put the fatalities from the novel and deadly coronavirus. 99% of the deaths were people at the end of natural life expectancy who typically had multiple serious underlying health conditions, quite often terminal health conditions. So the deadly coronavirus was only deadly to those who were already in the active process of dying anyway. But that didn't matter. It became the novel and deadly coronavirus, and they still played on the novel because they said your immune system doesn't know how to handle it. The human immune system, suddenly the human immune system became a conspiracy theory. And people don't, you can't fight this off because it's novel. Your immune system doesn't know how to deal with it. Well, how do you explain the fact that 99% of people getting it, over 99%, fully recover from it? That should have, and then in April, fast forward to April of 2020, two doctors in Bakersfield, California, citing research that had been done by Stanford University in tandem with the LA County Board of Health. They did a study together, and they did antigen testing on a large swath of the population. If memory serves, it was in the neighborhood of 50,000 people. What they did is they recruited around 50,000 individuals who were representative of the broader population in LA County, meaning it would be representative of the male-female mix. It would be representative demographically. You'd have the different age groups. So if 20% of the population in LA County is under the age of 20, they'd want 20% of the participants in their study being under the age of 20. If 12% are African American, they'd want 12% African American. And this is a large serological study. They wanted to see how prevalent is SARS-CoV-2, how far and wide is it spreading. And what they found is the actual case numbers that have been reported and identified through testing were but a drop in the bucket, that the actual infection rate was up to 55 times higher than what testing was identifying. So that meant the infection fatality rate was 50 could be as much as 55 times less than the case fatality rate. And these two doctors who run an urgent care clinic in Bakersfield, California, Dr. Erickson, kept stressing, everywhere we look at the data, California, lots of cases, very little death. Spain, lots of cases, very little death. Norway, lots of cases, very little death. And as we found out, even here in Canada, for longest time, you saw reported repeatedly, 80% of the deaths that were being identified were in long-term hospice, nursing home, palliative care type settings where people go to receive end-of-life care. So the deadly coronavirus was not deadly for 99% of the population. But that didn't matter. The data doesn't matter. What matters is the messaging. When you're dealing with disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, messaging trumps facts. And so the deadly coronavirus, you heard it all the time. Doug Ford, Justin Trudeau, we're doing everything we can to protect Canadians, Ontarians, British Columbians, Albertans from the deadly coronavirus. And so that is what enabled this messaging around the deadly coronavirus, is what got the population to accept lockdowns. Never before in history has there been the quarantining of healthy individuals. We've had quarantines before, but we always quarantined the sick, never the healthy. However, I would submit we were primed, we were conditioned to accept this. And one way by which we were conditioned is through movies. Watch the movie Contagion, watch the movie Outbreak. And in these movies, they quarantined the entire cities would become quarantined. And so if you see it in a Hollywood movie, well, then when it happens in real life, it normalizes it somewhat. And people accepted lockdown, crazy, health destroying, soul destroying lockdowns were accepted by most of the population who were at no risk of COVID. And then early into when this first started and for months afterward, people started asking for masks. Why don't we make everyone wear a mask? Shouldn't we make everyone wear a mask? That'll help, right? Everyone with their Facebook degree in epidemiology, virology, and infectious disease was screaming for mask mandates. And at this point, some truth came out. Bonnie Henry in British Columbia, Ontario's then Chief Medical Officer of Health was a gentleman by the name of Dr. David Williams. Fauci went on 60 Minutes. Tam spoke to reporters here in Canada, and they all said the same thing, that masks don't work. There's no evidence that masks have any impact whatsoever on mitigating viral spread. And that was based on science and data. See, the CDC had published years before COVID, a meta-analysis of 14 randomized trials, and they determined there was no benefit to public masking because in 14 of those they looked at 14 trials, 13 of them showed no benefit whatsoever. One showed a very modest benefit, but it had never been repeated, never been replicated, never been confirmed by further study. So when you have 13 studies saying one thing and one outlier saying something else that never gets confirmed by a further study, and they also made the obvious point that masking can make things worse. Fauci on 60 Minutes told the interviewer that, people who wear masks, they are constantly touching their face and touching the mask. And that leads to viral spread rather than stopping it. But people didn't care because their feelings took precedence over the facts. They were afraid. And I will submit, I will suggest, I will say that what happened is public health officials and the guys driving this agenda, the World Health Organization in partnership with the World Economic Forum, why look a gift horse in the mouth if we've got a significant portion of people with their Facebook degrees in epidemiology screaming for masks? Hey, let's give it to them. Hey, let's even tell them it works now. And so now, with no evidence, no direct evidence whatsoever that masks work, World Health Organization in partnership with the World Economic Forum and their operatives throughout health networks globally started pushing this false narrative that masks work. Now, have there ever been studies that showed that masks work? There have been studies done in sterile lab environments that show that masks do stop a certain number of droplets, big fat spit. But in every real world trial, except 2, and I'll talk about that, there were the 14 done that the CDC had looked at prior to COVID. 13 showed no benefit, 1 showed a very minor benefit. And then after the mask mandates came in, there was a large population-wide study done in Denmark. It was conducted by the Technical University of Denmark in tandem, I believe, with 3 hospitals. At that time, it was the largest public masking trial ever done in the world, the results of which were published to the Annals of Internal Medicine. And again, no benefit. No benefit whether you were in the masked arm or the unmasked arm. Your chance of flip a coin. You've got just as much chance of getting COVID in either group. And then laterally, a few months after that, maybe a year after that, finally they found a study. They did a large population study in rural Bangladesh. They went to a third world developing country into the most undeveloped part of it in a study that had so many flaws, but it gave them the results they wanted. And that's all people want. They want something to confirm their feelings. And so, and that's what we hear all the time. I have heard it from people. I feel safer wearing a mask, and feelings trump facts. That's how propaganda works. That's how misinformation, disinformation works. And especially when the misinformation, disinformation is being promulgated by official, trusted sources. Bob's your uncle. If you're on the side of the propagandists, if you're on the side of those engaging in misinformation, perfect storm. So the health officials weren't gonna, they were looking a gift horse right in the mouth, and they said, thank you. All right, we'll mandate useless masks that no one wears properly and that people have shut a blind eye to. And now people will say masks are a proven tool. Masks are a proven tool. And the talking heads, we heard Dr. Moore say it within the last couple of days when he announced his urging of everyone to mask up. You know, we can go back to proven measures like masking. It's not proven. It's not proven. It's never been proven. And the way people wear them, I mean, we all see the stupidity. People go into Tim Hortons masked up. They order their coffee and their donut. Then they sit down, they take the mask off, touching the outside, not washing their hands, stuffing it in a pocket. I've had these discussions with people who have masks, and as they're talking to me, they pull their mask down to make a particular point. Well, I feel safer wearing this. Well, thank you for spreading, you've got this wonderful space that you've been breathing on all day. So it's a great place to have bacteria, germs, viruses, pathogens just multiplying on. And now you've just touched it. And now you're going to touch all manner of common surfaces. Great job. Well, I feel safer doing it. But the thing is, because of the fear that was pounded into people's brains, and I've heard this as well, well, we can't do nothing. We can't do nothing. I've had it posed to me. Well, what would you do? But you can't say nothing. I'm in quicksand. I'm sinking in quicksand. So I've got to move. We got to engage in some action. Well, okay, you want to make things worse, stick a mask on your face. And all this fear over a mostly benign little virus. I have a blog called Canadian Soapbox on Blogspot. If you ever want to look it up, I started writing about COVID in April of 2020. And man, did I get hammered, because the messaging at the time was the deadly coronavirus. And so I turned it on its ear and said the mostly benign coronavirus. Mostly benign for 99% of the population. I'll acknowledge that for someone receiving end-of-life care in a long-term care facility, a hospice or a nursing home or a palliative setting, that any virus, RSV, influenza, gastrointestinal bug floating around, any virus can be serious and potentially deadly. But boy, did the comments, if you want to go back and check, had at least 2 or 3 guys who I was triggering because I was not buying into their fear. And when someone's afraid, they want everyone else to be afraid too. And all this fear that went on for months and better part of a year, it primed the population to take the critical thinking skills that take place in your frontal lobes. This is where higher thought processes are generated. And times of heightened stress and fear, it shuts down. And our capacity for critical thinking, higher thought processes gets removed. And people couldn't wait. A lot of people couldn't wait for a vaccine. We got to have a vaccine. Early in the pandemic, even the most optimistic experts were telling the world, well, at best case scenario, we're looking at 2 years. It will take at least minimum 2 years, and then maybe not at all, because they've been working on mRNA and these vaccine platforms, and they've never come up with a single one that's gotten out of the clinical trial phase. And they've been working on vaccines for coronaviruses for decades and have never developed a single safe and effective vaccine against a coronavirus ever. And I listened to that messaging and said, okay, 2 years at the best case. Okay, so I got 2 years before I'll be confronted with the question of whether or not to take a vaccine. And then, as we all know, by September, October, they were telling us, oh, it looks like it's going to be a go. 5-6 months after they started developing, and then they were escalating levels of confidence that, yeah, this is going to be a go. What? 2-year process? Now you're confident after just 5-6 months? Where's the phase 1 safety trial? I wanted to look. I know the clinical trial process. I know there are 3 separate trials that are run. First, phase 1, then phase 2, and then if those two are, if first phase 1 and phase 2 is successful, then you run a phase 3. Well, where's the phase 1 clinical safety trial? Where's the data? I want to look at it. Oh, well, they didn't do a separate phase 1 safety trial. They combined phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 together. We're moving at warp speed. Remember that? Warp speed. Warp speed is not science. Warp speed is science fiction. You probably know about it from Star Trek. It's the bending of space and time. Well, it's a neat concept, this bending of space and time, but it's not real. It's not, we don't do it. It's science fiction. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll learn how to bend space and time, but we haven't yet. So you can't take a process that takes years, and forget 2, even 2 was wildly optimistic. No safe and effective vaccine has ever been developed in less than, I think the record is 7. And, there was a swine flu vaccine around 1975, 1976 came out, and I think it was out for a month, and they pulled it because of all the dangers, deaths, paralysis, all manner of things. Goodness knows we've seen, but the times have changed. Times have changed. The media is the message now. The medium or the media is the message. The facts don't matter anymore. So we were primed to want a vaccine. A significant portion of the population was primed to want a vaccine, and then came out with it. And those like myself who said you cannot develop a safe and effective vaccine in months. Then the messaging, the propaganda, the lies, the disinformation, the propaganda ramped up again. And every public official, every politician, every public health official, every media talking head said the COVID vaccines have been thoroughly tested and have proven to be safe and effective. And that became just a talking point. Donald Trump's going to make America great again. Doug Ford is for the people. Justin Trudeau is for the middle class, and the COVID vaccines have been thoroughly tested and have been proven to be safe and effective. It was said so many times that the data, the facts, the evidence isn't even needed, because and it's not there. There's a famous exchange. Well, I watched it. There's a MPP from the Kitchener-Waterloo region of Ontario who was in Queen's Park questioning Christine Elliott, who at that time was Ontario's Minister of Health. And he was citing data from Kitchener-Waterloo Hospital region for their health unit. And the number of miscarriages in that jurisdiction had increased almost tenfold over what would normally be expected. And he asked Christine Elliott to address that issue. And what did she say? The COVID vaccines have been thoroughly tested and have proven to be safe and effective. She sidestepped the issue entirely because the data doesn't matter. The facts don't matter. What matters is the messaging. The COVID-19 vaccines have been thoroughly tested and proven to be safe and effective. I try and tell people that there's been no separate phase 1, separate phase 2, separate phase 3, and they've heard that they've read somewhere or heard somewhere that the COVID vaccines have gone through the full phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 process, just like every other vaccine. Bullshit. It's not true, but they believe it because it's from an authoritative source. You can go on to clinicaltrials.gov, which is the US government repository website that has all pharmaceutical products going through the clinical trial phase. And you can see it for yourself. And the one single trial that they've done, which they label as a phase 1, 2, 3 combined, that's for Pfizer. That one single trial isn't even done yet. It's not slated to be done. I believe the date, it's in March of 2023. I believe the date is March 23rd, 2023. So we're still December, January, February, March. We're still 3-4 months away from the single trial that's been done on the original vaccines. That trial hasn't even finished yet. And these bivalent boosters that they're now pushing out, that bivalent booster was even less tested than the original shots that we now know do not work. They do not stop transmission. They don't stop infection, and they don't stop transmission. And I will not be surprised if they try to force the bivalent boosters onto people. And trying to break through propaganda is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult, because what was needed at the beginning, you can defeat propaganda, but you need to get face to face with people. Well, we weren't allowed to be face to face. We were separated into our little bubbles. And what I'm going to suggest is that this is a war. And one of the axioms that people should know is that the first casualty in war is truth. There is something called crisis management, and it holds this. If you want to effect radical systemic change of anything, that without a crisis, you can't do it. You cannot effect a radical systemic change in any system unless there is a crisis. And absent a crisis, if you don't have a crisis, well, invent one or create one. And that's what we've seen done. We've seen a coronavirus manipulated in a lab, made to be highly transmissible in human beings, released into the general population. Then for months on end, We had health authorities doing everything possible to ensure that this virus got a firm foothold in the human population, advising against travel restrictions or even quarantining people known to have it. The most basic and simple interventions that have been used for 100,000 plus years. Don't do them, no need. Uh, Engineer a virus engineered to be highly transmissible amongst humans. They wanted to make sure that it got a firm foothold. Now, it's a mostly benign little bug, but they needed it spreading. They needed it to get into vulnerable populations so that when those vulnerable populations died, they could count their deaths as COVID and goose the numbers and drive the fear. They had to, and then once they knew, once it had firmly established itself, then they could move into phase two, which was shutting down the world and inundating the population with fear and panic. And they got us to accept all kinds of stupidity. The film and the TV and motion picture industry are essential. But an individual owning a hair salon, cutting hair, that's not essential. There was a brilliant woman in St. Catharines, Ontario, who, realizing the utter insanity of allowing TV production that shows someone getting their hair cut, that's allowed, but someone actually going to get their hair cut not being allowed. Seeing that anything related to the motion picture and film industry, that it was essential, what she did is she rebranded her business. And rather than going in for a haircut, you were going in to do an audition tape. And she got a video camera set up, and she would sit there and ask you questions while she cut your hair. And then you weren't paying her for a haircut, you were paying her to get an audition tape done for the motion picture industry or for the television industry. And any thinking person would applaud her genius at getting around the utter insanity and the utter brain dead contradictions. But a good chunk of the population, because they were so inundated, because their critical thinking skills are gone, they were mad at this woman. They weren't mad at the fact that the TV and motion picture industry were declared essential. That's okay. But this one woman trying to save her business, trying to keep her home, trying to keep herself out of poverty, she was now a threat to public health. This is the insanity that we've been living under. And arrows on the floor. Is everyone, people going passing each other in the grocery aisle? That's going to, cause disease. And plexiglass in front of a cashier. Crazy, insane, nuts, and it's happened before in history. It has happened before in history. Goebbels, who was, and I know people say, "Oh, you're bringing up the Nazis. That could never happen again." Yeah, it can happen again. It can happen again when we forget about what was done the first time. And Goebbels, during the Nuremberg trials, was asked how he was able to propagandize the German population. And he said, it doesn't matter whether it's a monarchy, a communist dictatorship, a fascist dictatorship, a democracy, whatever system of government you have, you can control the people. All you have to do is drive fear and then convince the population that anyone who doesn't buy in, that they are a threat to the safety of everyone. And that's what we saw done. Anyone who didn't go along all of a sudden was a threat to the health and safety of the good Canadian people. If you do not obey what the government is saying, you are a threat to the health and safety of the good Canadian people. You must walk down the grocery aisle in one direction. You must wear a mask when you go into the restaurant. You can take it off when you sit down. This is science. We said so. We are keeping you safe. Do what we say. Anyone who doesn't agree with us is a threat to you. This is what we've been living under for 2+ years. And I'm not overly optimistic that people will wake up. I wish I could be. But unfortunately, even now with the fear over COVID has largely dissipated. And so now they're driving fear over the fact that children are becoming infected with RSV at exponentially higher rates than has been typically seen. RSV, respiratory syncytial. I can't even pronounce it properly. It's a tough word. RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. That has been known about since discovered in 1956. Yes, every year children have gone into ICU, going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. A small percentage, very small percentage of kids, it would be serious. 90% of kids by the age of 2 have contracted the thing and kicked it to the curb, no problem, but not anymore. Now a lot of kids are getting sick, and there are papers out on this suggesting it's due to what they're calling immunity debt. Kids have been kept away from their peers and from schools and places where their immune system got a daily workout. And it's like going to the gym. The immune system needs to exercise. And well, the immune system has been getting very little exercise for the last 2 years. The immune system has atrophied, and now they're coming into contact with a weak ass little RSV, and sadly some children can't handle it. And so what's the solution? More of the same. Put masks on. Let's do everything we can to keep whatever germs are out there away from kids who can't even handle a mask properly. And on top of that, I wonder about the masking behavior of the kids who are ending up in hospital with RSV, because masks are proven to increase the risk of a respiratory infection. Cloth masks, 1,300%, and paper procedural medical masks, these type, doubles your risk of a respiratory infection. Guess what? RSV, it's a respiratory infection. One of a number. It can be SARS-CoV-2, can be influenza, can be bacterial, can be influenzas, all kinds of lower and upper respiratory tracts, all kinds of things can get in there. RSV is one of them. So are these kids, what is the masking behavior? What is their vaccination status? According to Dr. Patrick Provo with the University of Laval, he's put out publicly that the jabs increase an individual's risk of developing an RSV infection 4 times, fourfold, 400% increased risk. He's a professor of RNA microbiology. He's got more qualifications than I do. I don't have degrees in microbiology, immunology, virology, epidemiology. So what I do is I read. I read and I read and I read, and I try to stick to the most reputable sources I can. Annals of Internal Medicine, The Lancet, British Medical Journal, Nature, The Atlantic even. Because the last thing I wanted to end with, we're living in an era of lies. Lies have become truth. Truth have become lies. Masks which are proven to cause harm and show no benefit to stopping the transmission of a virus. Now, the standard line is masks are proven to work. We have vaccines that don't stop infection, don't stop transmission, and everyone knows numerous people who have had severe adverse reactions after getting jabbed. And yet the only thing you're allowed to say is the jabs are, the COVID vaccines have been thoroughly tested and that they have been proven to be safe and effective. Lies are truth, and truth are lies. And some, bald old guy on YouTube is, not to be believed. Look down below. There'll be a fact check down below. They may not be censoring anymore because they've gotten the goal's been achieved. 80-90% of the Canadian population jabbed, 70-ish percent in the United States. They've achieved their goal. So now the censorship is dialed way back, but you still have that little fact check thing down below where they'll repeat the same lies they've been repeating from day one. And that's the world that we're living in. I'll end it off by talking about it was a kid growing up in Nazi Germany right from the start. People tend to think that Nazi Germany only came into existence during World War II. And I'm trying to remember whether it was 1932 or 1933. I think it was January, February of 1933 when the Nazis rose to power in Nazi Germany, or in Germany, from the old, what they called the old Weimar Republic. And they started slowly eroding people's rights. But it was 7 years before the outbreak of World War. There goes an ambulance down my street. What a shock. It was 7 years before the outbreak of World War II. So for 7 years, the world came to Munich, Germany for the Olympics. I think it was 1936, the one where Jesse Owens famously won, I think, 4 gold medals and kind of stuck his finger in the eye of the eugenists, the fans of eugenics who said that blacks were an inferior race. Screw you. 4 gold medals. Jesse Owens. But there was a young kid. There's a book. It's a book written for kids or for young readers, but it's called The Boy Who Dared. And young Christian lad, and he saw through the lies, the propaganda, the misinformation, the disinformation. And he'd been in the Hitler Youth and everything. But when he got out of school and when the war had started up, his brother was fighting in the German army. And his brother came back on leave from France, and he brought with him a black market radio. Radios, people could have radios in Nazi Germany, but they were pre-programmed. You could only listen to approved government's official information. And this radio, this black market radio, he could tune it to any station he wanted, and he was able to listen to the British who were broadcasting in German into Germany to let the German people know what was really going on. So he was able, he stole his brother locked the radio in a closet and went back to active duty. And then he broke into the closet and started listening to the news reports. And he knew the lies that were being told to the German people. When the British reported gave reports on what had happened on this battle, that battle, they gave casualty figures both for the Germans and for the British. With the German, with the Nazi broadcast, they never gave any casualty figures, any losses. Everything was always going wonderful, perfect. Never lost a battle. No one ever died on the Nazi side. It was always the British, the French, the Americans who were dying. And so he believed the British. And when he had a job in the government, he was like a clerk, and he was able to get his hands on a typewriter and some carbon paper, and he started producing leaflets. And he started dropping them in call boxes, phone booths, and in apartment buildings at the mailbox slots. He would put these out. And then he enlisted the help of three friends of his from church. And he told them that if things ever went south and if they ever got caught, that he would take the hit, that he would say he blackmailed them or forced them to do it. And then he was caught stealing the carbon paper from a colleague, a young guy he worked with, and he enlisted him into the conspiracy. And then that guy ratted him out, and he was actually executed at 17 or 18 years of age. I think he was the youngest individual executed for political crimes by the Nazis. Now, a question to ask in that is, what did he accomplish? Did he shorten the war? Probably not. Not by a minute. Very confident in saying his actions had no tangible impact whatsoever on the macro situation that everyone was undergoing. However, I will say that he saved his soul. If you know that it's a lie and you're silent, then you're complicit. You are complicit in evil. And if you know that what has been going on for the past 3+ years, if you know that wearing a mask, standing up, but taking it off when you sit down, if you know that arrows on a grocery aisle in the lane of a grocery store, if you know that those arrows are useless, if you know that allowing the motion picture and television industry to be open, but that a woman filming people as she cuts their hair is not. If your eyes are open to the fact that there is evil going on and you bury your head and you be quiet, because what I'm going to suggest, there were a lot of people in Germany who knew what was going on was wrong, but they buried their heads. They said, well, what can I do about it? And maybe you can't do much, but at the end of the day, we're all going to be held to account. This life is not the end. And when evil was being promulgated, what did you do? It's a hard question. Well, I had to go along. I was just following orders. I was just doing what everyone else was doing. That's not a good answer. And it's not just Nazi Germany, Franco's Spain, Mussolini's Italy, the Peronist era in Argentina. All that's needed for evil to persist is for good people to do nothing. And yeah, we're up against it huge because the World Economic Forum has partnered with the World Health Organization. They've got all the corporate media. They've got the tech giants. And we are farting into a hurricane, to use one of my favorite euphemisms. We are a whisper, and we're going up against loudspeakers. We're at an AC/DC concert right in front of the speakers, and that's the Great Reset agenda being blared out with all its propaganda. Klaus Schwab has dubbed it, this is the false industrial revolution. Oh, screw off with the fourth industrial revolution. Call it what you really want to call it. The Fourth Reich. This program, PROGROM, this program has been attempted before. Everyone thinks it was Hitler. Yeah, Hitler was the front man. Hitler was the puppet. The ones pulling his strings were the corporate and aristocratic elite in Germany, but not just in Germany. The Nazi network extended throughout the globe. British aristocracy, their corporate elite, were backing the Nazis. In the United States, Henry Ford was a huge supporter of Hitler. He wrote a book called The International Jew. He bought a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent and used it to publish his anti-Semitic screeds. Prescott Bush, who's the grandfather of George W. Bush, the father of President George Herbert Walker Bush, his bank in the United States, look into it. You read up on this. His bank was shut down because they were engaged in financial dealings with the Nazis. It wasn't just this program. The Nazi Party, a year or two before that 1933 election, was bankrupt. They were going to go away. They were millions of dollars in debt in today's figure, or in today's money, and that they were going to disappear, and they were bailed out. And look into who bailed them out. One of the parties that bailed them out was the Rockefeller Foundation. There was a school, and I believe it was called the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, genealogical, I forget the word, and eugenics. And they weaponized science back then. They weaponized science, and God help you if you contradicted the science that the Nazis inundated the population with. They scientifically, they had their institute proving that the Jewish people were an inferior race, that they were spreading typhus. And that's garbage, and that's, everyone knows it's vile racism. But in that era, at that time, anyone who said that's just vile racism with no basis in fact, oh, you know more than the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. You are Mr. Scientist now, are you? You know more. You'd be gaslit the way we get gaslit. Anyway, I've rambled on way too long and stick to my notes as well as I should have. But God bless. Like and share if you like. Subscribe, and you'll find out when I do the next one. Probably be a night or two. Goodness knows, who knows what's going to happen with the war in Ukraine, with this news of the missile that landed in Poland. Just remember, the first casualty of war is truth, and question everything, regardless of the source. God bless.